Alright, in today's video we're taking a trip back to the NU tier. Today we're going to be using an Eject Pack Rotom-Mow. Now I got this idea because in the NU tier there are a couple of Pokemon that use Poltergeist, namely Dhelmise and Golurk, and both of them sort of make it so that a few Pokemon in the tier want to run no item or some other way to get around the Poltergeist. And so if my Rotom is no item, which is sometimes ran, then I can come into Golurk, who has Earthquake, and Rotom doesn't care about that, and it has Poltergeist and it doesn't care about that. So then at that point it would have to either lock into Stone Edge or for Dynamic Punch, both of which are pretty suboptimal. So really, it wants to be spamming Poltergeist and it can't do that if the Rotom has no item. And similarly, Dhelmise has Anchor Shot and Power Whip and doesn't really touch Rotom-Mow very well. So Rotom-Mow sometimes runs no item, and I think a step up from that is running Eject Pack. Now Eject Pack is a very interesting item in that if you get a stat drop, then you get switched out. Now that doesn't mean if your stats go below 0 or below neutral, that means if they drop at all for any reason, you get switched out. And if your opponent knows you have this, it can be somewhat exploited, but at the same time it allows you a lot of options. So if my opponent has a ground type they can switch into, but I really want to pivot no matter what this turn, I can go for Leaf Storm. If they go into their ground type and I click Leaf Storm, well, their ground type takes tons of damage and or dies, and I pivot. Or if they go into something that's not a ground type, maybe they have an electric immune Pokemon that's not a ground type, like, I don't know, Togedemaru. Or maybe they decide to stay in with their grass resistant or grass immune Pokemon, thinking, oh, well, they'll predict me to go into my ground type, so they're going to go for their grass move. Well, I guess if they're grass immune, then that's a problem. But if they're not grass, if they're just grass resistant, you can still switch out, right? And that's the thing that I think is sort of nice. So if they get into Serena, it doesn't matter. If I Leaf Storm or Volt Switch, I can still get on out no matter what. So I don't have to predict as much. And once I use the Eject Pack, then of course I have my no item ready for the Poltergeist Pokemon. Now, of course, in the majority of scenarios, you don't have to face against the Poltergeist Pokemon, and then Rotom would like to have leftovers, or would like to have a Choice Scarf, or what have you. But the Eject Pack is sort of nice for that one case scenario. And for one of the battles today, you'll actually see another interesting use case for the Eject Pack. Now, the next Pokemon on the team is Toxicroak, and if I'm being completely honest, I just sort of threw this team together. I just looked at the Pokemon and said, which one do I want to use? And this team has not great amounts of synergy. But I like Toxicroak as a Pokemon, and I haven't used it yet. We're going to run the SD set here with Drain Punch in the last slot over Low Kick. Drain Punch gives you some form of longevity, and since you have the Life Orb there, I don't really want to get stalled out. However, I will admit that Low Kick or some other stronger fighting type move would have been better there, I think, in the majority of scenarios, because Drain Punch would miss out on a bunch of KOs that maybe Close Combat or Low Kick would not have. And so there's something to be said about switching that move up. But this is just what the builder recommended to me, so that's what I went with. And I do like Drain Punch as a move. It's not often you get to use a good Pokemon using Drain Punch. It gives it some form of longevity. And it gives me an ability to be immune to water, which, while my team isn't necessarily weak to water, it is nice, right? I think that Toxicroak having that ability is really good, because then it can't get burned by Scald. So that's why physical Toxicroak is here. Guzzlord is next. Why are we using Guzzlord? Well, if you look at my team, I'm somewhat weak to opposing Rotom-Mow, and opposing Rotom-Mows can really mess up the entire tier, especially if they're not Choice Scarfed. Then they don't care about ground types coming in. So having a Mudsdale, or having a Sand Slash, or having even a Ground Volley, those don't really check Rotom-Mow, because if they Leaf Storm you, well, then you're dead, or you took 80%. Is not a good look. So having a ground type is not really a good answer to the premier electric type in the tier. So instead of worrying about being immune to Volt Switch, I'm just going to let Rotom do its thing, do whatever it wants. And instead I'm going to have Guzzlord. I'm going to run Assault Vest Guzzlord for two reasons. First of all, the Assault Vest will allow me to take more of those Volt Switches. And second of all, the Assault Vest means that if the Rotom has Trick and decides to trick one of my more passive Pokemon, which I have a couple of Pokemon that they might like to trick, then they're going to get an Assault Vest and they can't do any more of that nonsense. I do like Choice Band Golurk, but Assault Vest isn't a bad option either, because Guzzlord does have, pretty passable bulk, and all you really need to do is just have a huge HP stat in combination with that Assault Vest, and you can live quite a few hits. And then besides that, we're just running the standard physical version of Guzzlord. And we've got Dhelmise up next. Dhelmise is a pretty bulky Pokemon and is useful against a variety of physical attackers in the tier that would mess up my Guzzlord and my Toxicroak, right? It's fighting immune. I don't really care about dark types too much because of the other Pokemon that I have on my team. And it's really good for rock types as well. So all around, Dhelmise is pretty useful for this team. I think it's a good member for this team. Sylveon, I'm running the Choice Spec set. Choice Spec Sylveon is here for some immediate power because I have Toxicroak and Rotom, which are set up Pokemon, and Guzzlord, which could be immediately powerful, but because we're running Assault Vest, it is not. And Dhelmise, which is also a Soy Sand set. So I want something that can come out and punch holes in things. It's also nice because it's got some pretty decent SPDF, so it can act as a secondary check to some of those special attackers. Then finally, the Mon that I think is meh. I wanted some kind of hazard control. I didn't really care to put on hazards on this team because I just don't really care about hazards with heavy duty boots quite as much. It's nice to have them occasionally, but I don't really feel like I just threw this team together, like I said. But the Mantine is here to act for a Duke Fogger. I could have put Serena here, but I just used Serena recently. Didn't feel like using her again quite so soon. And Mantine has a pretty decent tanky factor as well, which is good. I like to have more bulky offense as opposed to full out offense usually, and Mantine helps my team stay nice and bulky. It is making my team a little more Rotom weak, but as long as we have the Guzzlord healthy, we should be okay, I'm hoping. I will say that having the Water Absorb on Mantine plus the Dry Skin on Toxicroak makes the water immunities really redundant. So I really do think Mantine would be a Pokemon that probably should get switched off of this team, but I don't know. The other thing Mantine is here to do is give me a second ground immunity, because all I have is Rotom, and if my Rotom got lost somehow, I want to have something that is immune to ground types. So that's why it's there. In case you're wondering, Air Slash is on this set over Toxic because you have to deal with two prominent Pokemon, Vileplume and other grass types, I suppose. It's nice to be able to Air Slash them, and especially Vileplume because it's such a passive Pokemon, right? It can strain sap you, but who cares? It can give you drain, who cares on the Mantine? Serena, you can Air Slash, and depending on its set, Air Slash will do a decent chunk, but at the same time, Power Whip is going to be hitting you on the physical side, and Mantine won't take that hit nearly as nicely, so you just have to pick your battles. The other Pokemon that it really hits hard is Toxicroak, actually. Toxicroak, of course, having Dry Skin means it's immune to Scald, and you can't Toxic that either. Both Vileplume and Toxicroak are poison types, so you need to have Air Slash for those. Otherwise, of course, Toxic would be nice. It's good for things like Vaporeon, which can come in and not care about your Scald. But even with Air Slash, Vaporeon, all it can do is sit in there and wish on you, and eventually it'll run out of Wish Protect, and you can hit it with more Air Slashes. So that's still a losing matchup for Vaporeon, even if you don't have Toxic. So that's the team for today. Like I said, I just threw this team together. I wasn't really sure how well it would perform, so we've got replays today. I just wanted to do this sort of first thing in the morning when I woke up, play some games, see how it goes, and I actually got some really good games today, so let's get into them. Alright, in this first battle we've got an Escavalier and a Golurk and a Stakataka and Arcanine, a bunch of things that hit really hard, and a Blastoise, of course, which I have to be aware of in the back because Blastoise is a very scary Shell Smash sweeper. I do have 2 Water Absorb Pokemon, but Mantine is somewhat passive, and I'd have to get lucky with Scalding it down. And Toxicroak can Sucker Punch it after Drain Punching, and doesn't really care too much about Dark Pulse, but it is still risky, so it's not necessarily something that I deal too well with, especially if the rest of my team gets chipped down. You know, I have to keep something in the back for it, but it's not a sure thing, so I've got to watch out for that. Now, this is the first game I played. Wasn't really fully awake at that point, and I didn't really know what to lead off with against this team. The team is pretty slow. I will say that's definitely the worst part about my opponent's team, is that it's just a very slow team. And against this kind of team, I don't really know what Guzzlord's role is. It doesn't really like Vileplume too much, and Golurk is fine, but Golurk was not really a problem for my team. And Arcanine, you know, if it close combats, I can revenge kill it. So I really don't see what Guzzlord can do in this game that would be too valuable against a bunch of physical attackers, plus a Vileplume, which I can't beat in the Blastoise, which is going to just get Ice Beaming it. So I think I would prefer to lead off with it to get some initial value out of it. This is sort of what I'm thinking here. And they actually lead off with a Escavalier. And Escavalier is a threat for sure, but I don't know what item it is. They actually have X-Scissor, which is a really interesting item. And you can see that I knocked off a Scope Lens. So this is an Escavalier that wants to crit everything. I will definitely say that's not the best set Escavalier can run. It can run Assault Vest, which is scary. It can run a Leftovers with like a Rest set. I know that that's the thing that they run currently. But Scope Lens, scary item for sure, but definitely one that's pretty gimmicky. Now, X-Scissor, of course, is just about as powerful as Close Combat would have been. So we live that, which is nice. And I decide that I'm going to save my Guzzlord, which, in retrospect, maybe is not the greatest idea. Of course, Guzzlord is a sack, but it's sort of risky to switch into this Escavalier. I don't know what it's going to go for. But I feel like I can go into Sylveon. I don't think they'll Iron Head, and they don't. They go for Night Slash. So that was an extraordinarily risky play, because if they had gone for Iron Head, which they totally could have, then that would have been majorly a problem. I don't think they would have, though, because I have Mantine and I have Rotom, and so I feel like Iron Head doesn't get you as much out, and if they're going to predict me to switch, they're not going to predict me to switch into Sylveon, I feel. But again, this was a very risky play, and probably was not a good one. At the very least, I could have stacked the Guzzlord, got off some final damage. I also do think it is funny they left in their Escavalier against my Guzzlord, because Guzzlord, you know, Fire move, or a bunch of other stuff that could be really threatening to Escavalier. But, you know, it is what it is. At the very least, I'm glad to have gotten rid of its item. If it had some item that would have helped it have longevity, then Escavalier is pretty bulky, and it can be sometimes difficult to kill. At this point, I have Mystical Fire, and they should know it, but I'm still going to go for it. They're going to Stack Attacka. That's a decent chunk. The Stack Attacka doesn't do anything to the Blade. The Blade hard beats Stack Attacka almost always. So, just going to click Close Combat here. It's going to do some passable chip to Arcanine. Nothing too crazy, but I do need the Arcanine chip down, so I'll definitely take it. They could have Wild Charge, but I don't really care, and I don't think they will. Wild Charge on Arcanine is pretty bad, so I'm going to go into my Mantine here. Just going to click Scald. It's a safe option. Unfortunately, do not get a burn. Now I'm already status, so this Vileplume can't put me to sleep or anything. I'm just going to stay in an Air Slash. And they get Giga Drain recovery plus Black Sludge recovery, so they're healing back a decent chunk. And unfortunately, we're not going to get any flinches, so I am going to be forced to switch here because I don't want to sack my Mantine just yet. So here I'm going to go into my Sylveon. And now, they go for Strength Sap, which is what I figured they'd go for. Now, here's an interesting turn. So I go for Psyshock. And if we look at the calc, normally Psyshock would barely be a 2-hit KO because most Vileplume run physically defensive. So going for Mystical Fire would definitely have been a better play overall here. Going for Psyshock, that's just me being not very good at Pokemon. Should have gone for Mystical Fire. But if we look at the calc, because Vileplume took so much, we can actually see that this is most likely going to actually be a max defense, max special defense Vileplume. If we look at Psyshock damage to a bold max defense, max special defense Vileplume, it does 70 to 83. I got an 83 roll, I believe, is what we got. Yeah, we got 83. So that's the high end of that. And if we look at Nantine, the set I'm running, in the utility, the Air Slash gets within a roll similar to that on the special defense side. So I believe that's the Vileplume that they're running. And we can see that that Vileplume does not take hits as well as if it had max HP. So I can understand the reasoning behind running max defense, max special defense. By keeping my HP stat low, when I Giga Drain, I can get a higher percentage of my HP back from your HP, right? Because I have a low HP number. Back when I was first starting to get into competitive Pokemon, I sort of thought similarly to that, but it ends up making a Pokemon much weaker on both sides of the defense spectrum because you just don't have the HP numbers to take any hits. So you take all hits worse. Generally, Pokemon want to invest in one defense stat. Maybe if you had a really high HP stat number, sort of like Guzzlord does, then maybe there'd be something to be said there. But really, you have to have a high HP stat to go with your defenses right off the bat, right? So this Vileplume does not take hits as well as it should have. If I had Mystical Fire there, I don't think it would have done any more. If they really were max defense, max special defense, then it would have been more just, up to your flavor. But that was just sort of funny, I thought, in retrospect. In any case, they're going to click Stun Spore here. So they're a Stun Spore, which is sort of annoying. But they can't stay in because they can't Strength Sap that off. So they go into a Scavalier, which is fair. If I had gone for Mystical Fire, they wouldn't have been able to go for that. Get a quick Razor Shell. Get a defense drop. And Night Slash, even after that, does not kill me. So I'm just going to stay in. I want the Escavalier dead. I'm going to switch out here. Just going to sack the Mantine because it can't really live much with that low HP stat. So, I'm one step closer to getting swept by Blastoise at this point. I'm going to go into Rotom, just going to Volt Switch out, it's very safe. They go into Golurk, and here's the first opportunity for me to show off, but I'm not Choice Scarf. My opponent definitely should have scouted. Even if they had though, I would have always switched out, even if they'd gone Vileplume or whatever. Here they actually sack a bunch of Pokemon, and so my opponent's really choking now. They sack their Vileplume, they sack their Stakataka. They should have gone into something, I don't know what, but they should have gone into something that wasn't those two, because they're not getting any value out of it. I'm not going to stay in, I'm intimidated, and I need to save the Toxicroak for the Blastoise, 100%. I'm actually going to let the Arcanine kill itself to Flare Blitz, but it doesn't kill me, and I'm actually able to kill it with Pixelate boosted Hyper Voice. I have to stay in on this, I don't want it to set up, and if they decide to set up in my face, they're actually going to get blown away by Hyper Voice. You can see they didn't have a White Herb, so I don't know what they were. They weren't Focus Sash, and they weren't White Herb, so they must have had some other item. Whatever that could have been, but because they didn't get their defense back, I was able to kill them in one hit. So the Blastoise didn't even end up doing anything at all. So in the end, I think my opponent definitely did their best to choke there at the very end. Instead of going into Vileplume on my Toxicroak, they should have gone hard into the Arcanine, gotten that Intimidate off. They could have Will-O-Wisps, they could have done things like that. And then they would have had those other Pokemon in the back to be really annoying. But overall, not a bad first game, and we'll take it from there. My next opponent has a pretty threatening team. They have a bunch of pretty powerful Pokemon. Tyrantrum and Kingdra are both pretty decent Dragon-type sweepers, and they have Stakataka, which of course can be very scary on its own as well. And I don't know what the Sylveon wants to do, but Sylveon is usually a pretty good Pokemon to have. So, one thing I do note is that my Rotom is pretty good against my opponent. It can definitely mess up the Mudsdale because I have Leaf Storm. And the rest of the Pokemon on the team don't really appreciate it except for maybe Whimsicott. So overall, not a bad lead matchup if I lead off with Rotom, and if they lead off with Mudsdale, then I can potentially trick them and get a Leaf Storm off. So we're going to see how well I play that. Here, I'm going to Volt Switch to make them think that I'm Choice Locked. If they had switched out, which I believe they should have on turn 1, because I don't personally believe ever staying in against a Rotom, then I would have gotten momentum. But now they may think that I'm Choice Locked. So I think the turn 1 play was fair. Obviously my opponent got Stealth Rock up for free, but I still can trick them the next turn. Now here I'm going to make a bit of a misplay, Here I'm going to set up a nasty plot. No reason for me to set up a nasty plot here, because all I've done now is tell my opponent, hey, I'm not choice locked, without getting any damage off on a Mudsdale, right? If I had gone for Leaf Storm that turn, well then the Mudsdale would have taken lots of damage. But now they know, of course, that I have Leaf Storm, and I'm not afraid to use it, so they're going to switch out now, so I don't get any benefit out of this. However, Leaf Storm is really not something my opponent can switch into. And you'll see that their Whimsicott is not a Grass Resist, because they take 80% from that. Now, I am switched out, but that's fine. I can go to my Toxicroak. I'm just going to click Gunk Shot here. Can't really set up in front of a Whimsicott because they could have Encore. So I'm just going to go Gunk Shot, which is fair. I'll go back into Rotom. Mudsdale, Rotom matchup is pretty good. I'm just going to Leaf Storm straight up here, not messing around with the Mudsdale, as they actually go for Roar. So they may have expected me to try to Nasty Plot or something up again. They're going to go for Toxic. I don't really care. I want to get the rocks off the field. And they have Tailwind. This is the last turn of Tailwind. So they didn't get any offensive utility out of their Tailwind. They wasted it on a Mudsdale, which I think was a bad play on their part. Kingdra is a scary Pokemon because I have Water Absorb, but Kingdra is clearly going to be the crit Kingdra version because they don't have any rain support except for maybe on Whimsicott. So this is going to set up on my Mantine, and even though Mantine can absorb water moves, the Mantine doesn't really do too much to it except for like Air Slash, and Draco Meteor is still going to do way too much damage to my Mantine. So it's really a passive Pokemon, can't really do anything about that. I need to go into something more offensively based. So Sylveon it is. I'm going to go in and set up a crit, and this actually puts my opponent in an awkward position. If I wanted to, I could switch out into one of my Water Absorb Pokemon. However, I don't really think that's a great play for me because if I go into my Mantine, well, I'm still passive, and I let them get a crit boost. So that's not a good play, right? So dancing around my opponent or trying to dance around my opponent is a really bad play. And my opponent seems to know that because they just go straight up for Surf. And it does a lot of damage. If they had gone for Hydro Pump, maybe that could have killed, I'm not sure. But I'm able to kill them. So we make it out totally alive from that encounter. So I'm pretty pleased with that. Now they're going to stack Attack, which is fair. But now my opponent makes a big misplay because they actually decide to go for Trick Room. And I have my Doublade, which does not care about stack Attacker. I'm going to set up a Swords Dance here because I don't want to get a defense drop and I need to get +2 before I can kill with close combat. And now I have 2 turns of Trick Room left, and I super effectively hit both of the remaining Pokemon. Unfortunately, they show that their Sylveon has Protect, and so they're able to stall out the Trick Room because they get a lucky double Protect. At this point, I don't really need the Blade, so I'm just going to sack it. I'm going to go for Shadow Sneak, and I get a good chunk off, but at this point, I have to go into my Toxicroak and risk a Gunk Shot. I land, however, so that's good. And now the only thing left they have is the Tyrantrum. Just going to Drain Punch it. It's not going to kill. If I had had Low Kick, of course, that would have one-shot it, but Drain Punch is just fine because they would have to outplay all 8 Sucker Punches afterwards, and I'm just going to click Sucker Punch 8 times if I have to. So that's the game there. So overall, very interesting game. My opponent had a bunch of offensive Pokemon, but they didn't capitalize on their Tailwind like they should have, I believe. And ultimately, their team composition is such that I don't really feel like they threaten too much in a well-balanced team. But maybe I just got lucky and my team composition happened to match up well against theirs. Not really sure exactly how to diagnose my opponent's team, but that was not a particularly difficult team to break down. Although I do wish I had Leaf Stormed on turn 2 instead of Nasty Plotting, but it is what it is. For game 3, we have an opponent that actually beat me once while I was playing before, and I really didn't play that game well at all, but now I have a chance to redeem myself. I learned a couple things about their team. I know that their Serena is Assault Vest, and I know that their Toxicroak is a special Toxicroak. They beat me down with their Tauros, and if you look at my team, you can see that Tauros is actually very powerful. So it's not too surprising that the Tauros ran through it and why I lost. But I still think that if I play it better, that I can definitely win this time. So I'm going to lead off with my Rotom because last time I played them, they let off with their Amistar. This time they let off with their Tauros, knowing that it does really well against my team, but now they're going to be forced to switch out. I wanted to get damage off on the Tauros if they decided to stay in with Leaf Storm, but they go into their Serena. I missed a Gunk Shot here, and they knock me off, which is unfortunate. But I can still Gunk Shot again, but I missed again. So the Serena could have been dead by now, but I missed twice. I'm definitely going to switch here, going to go back into Rotom as they click Rock Tomb, maybe predicting my Mantine or maybe predicting this, I'm not sure. At this point I click Volt Switch because I know they're not going to stay in, and I go back into my Toxicroak. See if I can hit a Gunk Shot this time. They're going to hard switch into the Sand Slash, I actually do land, and I'm going to go back into Rotom. They're going to get up a Spike, which is a little bit annoying. Here I'm going to click Leaf Storm just in case they decide to predict me to Volt Switch, but now I'm going to Volt Switch safely. I missed the Leaf Storm, so you notice that we can't land a move in this game. Here I have to go to Toxicroak because U-turn is almost certainly coming out, and I need to go into something offensive. At this point my Toxicroak can't really do too much because the Tauros, right? The Tauros is going to come in, it's going to claim a kill. My team does not deal well with this Tauros whatsoever. And Sucker Punch at least is going to get off some form of chip so that I can get it killed with the Blade or the Rotom or even the Sylveon later on, right? But if I don't get that chip off, there's nothing to be done, and they're definitely going to go for Earthquake. I can go into my Rotom, which, you know, I sort of need the Rotom though because they got the Amistar and the Sand Slash, and I can go into Mantine, but the Mantine is going to take a Rock Slide afterward, and I don't know if they're going to go for Earthquake even, so it's not really a good switch-in. So I feel like Sucker Punch isn't the worst play there. It also means that if they do go for Earthquake, they're going to take a Life Orb chip because it's not Sheer Force boosted. So it is what it is. Because they have the Spike up, pretty difficult for me to switch in with a lot of Pokemon. At this point I'm going to go into the Blade because the Blade is very bulky with its Eviolite, and I do have Close Combat and Iron Head to scare the Tauros. So at this point, they're definitely not going to stay in. I'm just going to go for Iron Head, which is my most powerful move against neutral targets. Here, they're going to knock me off, which is annoying, but whatever. I'm going to click Defog, as they actually are going to go for another Spike. But at this point, they're going to realize maybe I shouldn't stay in against the Water type with my Ground type. They go into Espeon though, which is sort of a weird play, because what does Espeon do against the Mantine? Defog's still going to defog all the hazards away, and as you can see, Psychic doesn't do anything. Then they go into Amistar, which also does not beat my Mantine. If they had a Rock move, then sure, I guess, but they don't. And I know that they're not going to have one, so I'm just going to stay in. I can't get a burn in this game either, so that's unfortunate. I'm going to be able to defog though. They're going to go for a Rock Slide, but because it's Sheer Force boosted, they cannot get a flinch. I'm just going to get off a decent amount of damage. Here they go for Body Slam, which is fair enough. My Blade got him for free, and my Blade would definitely live an Earthquake at that range. So they should have switched out, so I got into my Mantine, predicting them, but they decided not to. And at this point, I don't want to make that same prediction again, so I'm just going to sack Mantine at this point. Now they realize they should probably switch, as I click another Iron Head, which would have killed the Tauros. Here I make a bit of a questionable play. I let my Eviolite get knocked off. It does put the Sand Slash in range of a Shadow Sneak, and instead they decide to sack their Omastar to Shadow Sneak. But now I am a lot less bulky. Here I'm going to switch out because I do still need this. Going to go into my Sylveon. Now this Serena is definitely a Solve Vest, and you'll see here it takes nothing from this Mystical Fire. And the next turn I'm going to just switch it up and go for Hyper Voice, and it does about the same amount of damage. So the Serena, hard to kill, but what are you going to do? I'm going to go into Ghost Lord. At this point they're going to turn into something to fodder it off. They're going to kill their Sand Slash, and I get a Beast Boost. So now I'm a little more powerful. It's a Lumberry. Interesting. Now because they're really tanky Serena, they're actually going to die. Because they didn't have the Rapid Spin boost, they did not speed me. 100% going for Dazzling Gleam here. Then I switch into my Blade. Now my Blade is really weak, but here my opponent makes a huge misplay. So they had their Espeon going for Dazzling Gleam. It's not going to two-shot me, so I can safely predict them to go into their Tauros. They're definitely going to be like, oh, my opponent's going to Shadow Sneak. I'll get my Tauros for free. But I'm not going to let them make that play because the Tauros is more of a threat to me than the Espeon is. The Espeon is not a threat against my Doublade. Because if they decide to stay in after a close combat, I can always Shadow Sneak the next turn, right? But the Tauros, if it comes in, just wins. It 100% just wins against my team. Cannot let that happen. So I'm going to close combat here, and they sack their Tauros. So now the game is lost for my opponent. They can't do anything. Toxicroak I already know is special. Toxicroak, when it's special, runs Sludge Bomb, Focus Blast, Vacuum Wave. Maybe they run another move, I don't know. But definitely nothing that can hit the Blade. So they're just going to sack it now to the Iron Head, and the Shadow Sneak is going to finish off the Espeon. So I go 1-1 against this opponent. You can definitely see how scary that Tauros is against my team. And I definitely probably should have played my Doublade more conservatively. My Rotom didn't get much time and didn't really do too much once the rest of the Pokemon on my opponent's team were weakened, because I didn't really need it quite as much for the Leaf Storm. And so I probably should have gone into the Doublade maybe, or the Rotom on the Serena instead of letting my Doublade get knocked off. That was definitely a misplay on my part. But my opponent definitely made some questionable plays of their own, and by that one predict at the end allowed me to not completely get lost again to Tauros. So I think I redeemed myself from that previous game that I played against this guy, and definitely Tauros is scary. Alright, now for the last game, the best game of this entire video. So right off the bat, one of the things I like to do when I'm playing an opponent is look at their rating. By getting sort of a metric on how good your opponent is, it sort of tells you how you should play, right? If you're on the low ladder, you should never predict your opponent. You should always just click what's super effective in front of you. And generally speaking, you're going to get out better in the end than if you don't do that. Because the low ladder, you never know how good your opponent is, and usually those people might not have as good of a grasp on the mechanics of the tier or the mechanics of even Pokemon. And so they make more erratic plays that wouldn't necessarily make sense to a high ladder player. And so by trying to predict your opponent, you're going to predict wrong more often than not. However, if your opponent is a high ladder player, then you can know that your opponent knows what's going on because they've won lots of battles. As a result, you can expect them to make good plays, right? You can expect your opponent will make plays that make sense most of the time. As a result, you can play to that out, right? You can say, okay, my opponent will make a play that makes sense here. Let me predict my opponent. And so I think that playing high ladder players can sometimes be easier than playing low ladder players just because they actually know what they're doing. However, of course, they also come with a lot of skill, so you have to definitely respect them because they do know what they're doing. And usually they're using really good teams as well, so you gotta watch out for that. Now, my opponent doesn't really have anything for Rotom. The tier generally doesn't have anything for Rotom. Rotom really beats any ground type that comes out against it, right? I can beat Mudsdale, that's fine, I don't care about that. So I guess I should point out that my opponent has a rating of 1525, and 1525 in the NU tier is very high. It's the highest I've ever seen, I think. But in any case, I expect them to play very well. So I'm going to lead off with Rotom here. If they lead off with Aerodactyl, if they Focus Sash lead, which is, oftentimes what they are, then I can Volt Switch out into something more safe. And if they decide to go into Mudsdale, then I can either try to bluff a Scarf or I can go for Leaf Storm. If they lead off with their own Rotom, if their choice Scarfed, then they'll either trick me or they'll Volt Switch out and I can get a slow Volt Switch. So I've got all sorts of options if I lead off with Rotom. We're actually going to see they'll lead off with their Scrafty and they'll get the Intimidate off on me. And so this actually shows the other niche use case of an Eject Pack. So I sort of hinted at this in my team breakdown, but the Eject Pack goes off whenever any of your stats get lowered. And this is the same with White Herb. So sometimes this really just wastes it, right? If I'd have been a White Herb Blastoise, then I would have been really mad because I would have lost my White Herb right here. However, this Eject Pack, actually, I don't mind losing it, right? The whole point of my Eject Pack was to lose the item for Poltergeist. Not that it helps me in this game, but I don't really need that item. It doesn't help Rotom in any way, shape, or form. And what it does do is it means that, okay, this lead matchup, It isn't great for either of us, really. But I don't want to be in here. I'd rather be in with my Sylveon. Well, guess what? The Eject Pack procs, and now I am in with my Sylveon for turn 1. So now my lead matchup is impeccable, because they got off the Eject Pack on me. So now they're forced to switch out. I know they'll switch out because they're a good player, so I go for Mystical Fire. Here though, we're not going to predict them to predict me. I'm just going to click Mystical Fire again. They go into Sylveon. If they'd gone into Rotom, that would have been a problem. If they'd gone into Arrow, I have the Blade for that. Mudsdale doesn't want to take a Choice Specs Mystical Fire. So really their only good play would be going into Sylveon, which is now going to get lowered special attack. And I see the leftovers, so they're not even Choice Specs. So I can safely go into Toxicroaks, because non-Choice Spec sets don't have Psyshock. Here, they could have gone into Copperage trying to get a Wisp Pass, so I'm just going to click Drain Punch, no point clicking Gunk Shot, and they're going to go into the Mudsdale. I'm going to go into my Rotom, does not care about Mudsdale, and I'm just going to click Nasty Plot here actually. I'll click Nasty Plot, oops, did not mean to reset that. Why do I click Nasty Plot here? Because they've gotten their Stealth Rock up, right? The Mudsdale has done what it wants to do. There's absolutely no way they're going to stay in. A lot of times Mudsdale try to stay in on Rotom to predict the Volt Switch, but my opponent is one, a good opponent, so they're not going to make a stupid play like that. And two, my opponent knows that I can predict them to switch, right? My turn 1 showed that, okay, I'm going to click Mystical Fire in front of a Scrafty predicting a Copperage. So they know now that I'm willing to make plays like that. So there's no way they're going to stay in with their Mudsdale when they know the kind of player I am. So I'm actually going to click the Leaf Storm. I could have clicked the Volt Switch, and that would have been a good play, but this actually works out way better for me, because they go into the Rotom, and the Rotom now is quite threatened by a +2 Leaf Storm, right? +2 from a Rotom to another Rotom usually does quite a lot of damage, just because their moves are very, very powerful, right? Overheat, Leaf Storm. Nothing needs to be said about Rotom fan. But most Pokemon, most Rotoms will do a hefty chunk with their +2 moves against each other. And as you can see, I do 80% to their Rotom. They actually missed their Leaf Storm, which is a bit unfortunate. I don't really think it mattered too much, because they wouldn't have gotten off nearly as much damage on me. As you'll see in the end, that HP is not going to come into play. But that is unfortunate for them. At this point, I can safely Volt Switch out. They're actually going to go into their Sylveon as I Volt Switch, which means that now I can safely go into my Toxicroak again. At this point, we're going to click Gunk Shot, because I don't want to over-predict. Oh wait, no, I don't. I go into Rotom, sorry. I'm going to Rotom. And the reason why, because I was actually thinking when I was playing this game, is because what do they have for my Toxicroak? They have Mudsdale. And the Mudsdale is 100%, so they should go into the Mudsdale. And they do. Good. Even if they stayed in, then I don't think that they could have gotten too much value off of a Wish in most cases, because I can click Thunderbolt pretty safely, and nothing can really take advantage of that Wish. So yeah, go into Rotom on this. And they go into Mudsdale on the Toxicroak, which is what they should have done. Here though, they're going to stay in on a Leaf Storm, which I don't really think was a great play. But to be fair to my opponent, what did they have for it? They definitely aren't going to go Aerodactyl. 0% of the time they go Aerodactyl. They could go into the Rotom and sack it, and I think that probably would have been the correct play. Their Rotom is not Choice Scarf, because my Rotom outsped it. I'm not sure what their Rotom was, actually, to be honest, because they didn't show leftovers. But they could have sacked it. I think that's probably what they should have done, instead of going into staying in with their Mudsdale. And then they could have gotten into their Sylveon, maybe, I guess. But yeah, they stayed in with their Mudsdale, and so now they lost it in one hit. So that was not a great play. Now they're going to go Scrafty, and I can safely Volt Switch on this. It doesn't get priority except for Fake Out. And so I'm going to go into my Mantine. And they go for Iron Head. Now that wasn't a bad play. If I decided to go Sylveon on the Scrafty, then Iron Head would have blown me away. But I'm not dumb, right? I play dumb sometimes, but I'm not that dumb. And I know Scrafty has Iron Head. So I'm going to go on my Mantine. Mantine doesn't really do too much against the rest of my opponent's team, right? Rotom is going to beat Mantine, and Aerodactyl can beat Mantine with Stone Edge. So I don't really need Mantine. What is Mantine doing? Mudsdale is gone. So Mantine really is going to be here for Scrafty. And I do want the Rocks gone as well. So they are using Iron Head, so they're going to switch out. I go for Defog. Now they have no more Stealth Rock up. I'm going to Toxicroak because, again, they don't have Psy Shock. My opponent does make a good play here, going to Aerodactyl. I don't want to take a dual Wing Beat. I'm going to go into the Blade as they go for Earthquake, which is also a fair play. But as you can see, it doesn't do anything. Here I know they're not staying in. They're definitely switching, so I'm going to go for Close Combat. Close Combat would hit Scrafty, and it would hit Copperajah, right? If you predict me to go for Iron Head, for example, there's absolutely no way you're going to Sylveon. But Close Combat kills Rotom, it kills Copperajah, and it does a good amount to Scrafty. So that's another prediction that we made here. And it was a safe prediction because Close Combat into Aerodactyl is going to be very powerful because Close Combat is a strong move and Aerodactyl is a very frail Pokemon. So I have no regrets about making that play either. I think that was a very safe play for me to make. Here, I'm definitely not going to stay and I have to keep this healthy. I'm going to go to my Mantine again. I don't really care about Mantine at this point, and it can only really help against Scrafty. At this point, Toxicroak, very safe Pokemon to go into. Safely click Drain Punch, and here I can safely click the Gunk Shot. They actually have Cute Charm, which didn't even register when I was playing this game. Maybe it should have, but I just click Gunk Shot, and my opponent doesn't want to risk that, so they're going to switch into Aerodactyl, which is why I didn't even notice, because it never came into play. And that does a good chunk. The Blade can come out safely though, as my opponent goes for Roost. Bit of a passive play. Roost Aerodactyl, not a big fan of it, because Roost Aerodactyl, you're already a frail Pokemon, right? Getting health back on a frail Pokemon usually, to me, isn't the smartest option. I have seen it do work, but in this instance, it did not do work because I can easily go to Blade here and click Iron Head. They're going to do Earthquake, which does not kill me. Iron Head is going to kill them. I'm not going to click Close Combat again if that's what they were thinking. And at this point, the Blade is done. So I'm just going to click Shadow Sneak on this Scrafty. I can just sack it, I don't even care. So now I can go into Toxicroak, safely click Drain Punch, that'll take out the Copperajah. That's fair enough, and now they have to go into Sylveon and hope that I miss my Gunk Shot, which I do not miss my Gunk Shot, and at this point the game is over, because I kill Scrafty, and I kill Rotom as well, with either Sucker Punch or with Gunk Shot. I probably would have gone for Gunk Shot since I have my own Rotom and I have a full health Guzzlord, so I don't want them pain splitting up. I'd rather just put Gunk Shot and get the game over with. But yeah, I think I played this game almost perfectly. I think it was really cool that we got to see the turn 1 drop with Intimidate, and so I was able to go hard into Sylveon on that. And I think that my opponent definitely played fine. I think they made one misplay by sacking the Mudstale. But other than that, I think that they played pretty safe, pretty conservatively, and they didn't make too many weird plays. But I definitely think that I played this game pretty well. And I wasn't too sold on this team, but once I got that off, I said, well, I guess this team isn't that bad if it can beat a player like this. So anyway, I think Eject Pack Rotom definitely showed that it has some value, some merit, and I wouldn't be surprised to see other players picking it up at this point. So that'll be it for me today, and I'll see you next time.